Well, hello and welcome to everybody that's tuned in. Welcome to this live webinar from Zero Waste Scotland on extended producer responsibility for packaging. Zero Waste Scotland is in the process at the moment of supporting the Scottish Government in its discussions on this topic with the UK Government, the Welsh Government, and DAERA in Northern Ireland to inform the development of a new extended producer responsibility scheme for packaging, and a second stage consultation on the proposals for that is currently running up until the 4th of June. So this webinar is all about looking at some of the detail around that consultation and having the opportunity for a bit of question and answer, some discussion around the ins and outs of that. So my name is Andrew Pankhurst. I'm the Communications Programme Manager here at Zero Waste Scotland. And I'm delighted to welcome to the broadcast two Zero Waste Scotland staff members who are here to help us understand the implications of these proposed changes, as well as answer any questions you might have. So first up is Jamie Fry, who is a policy analyst here at Zero Waste Scotland. Afternoon, Jamie. And I think you were on mute for a second there. And then secondly, Emily Ray. Emily is a project manager within our policy team as well at Zero Waste Scotland. Hi, Emily.
Hi.
And also we are delighted to welcome Nat Chalamander from SEPA, the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, and Nat is an EPR specialist over there. Thanks for joining us, Nat.
Hello, good afternoon. Nice to be here.
Thank you. So if you've joined the webinar today, then I guess it's likely it's because your business or your organisation is due to be affected by the new packaging EPR scheme in some way. So this is a really good opportunity if you have questions around that to put them to our panel. To set the scene, I think it's important to go back to basics as to why packaging EPR reform is needed. 4/5 of Scotland's carbon footprint comes from our use of materials and resources. So a huge majority of our overall footprint. And a big part of that is from the goods that we produce, use, and often just throw away. Packaging also forms a big part of that impact. It's not to say that it's not important, it is. Packaging helps protect products from becoming damaged and therefore ending up as waste. So it does perform a really important role, but the volume of single-use packaging that enters the global waste stream every year now is absolutely enormous. And I think we all will have seen on TV or in real life the negative impacts that can have. We produce more than 10 million tonnes of packaging waste in the UK every year. And according to our own research, 77% of Scots say they are concerned about the amount of packaging that ends up as waste or as litter in our natural environment. That's why we fully support the development of a new EPR scheme, as there is real potential for that to reduce the amount of unnecessary packaging that's produced and also make it easier and less confusing to recycle and also even to reuse the packaging that is produced. So in order to engage with as many people, businesses and organisations as possible about this important consultation, we're hosting this webinar today. So therefore, we'd love to have your questions. We have actually had quite a few in already, which is fab. But if you have questions and you've just tuned in, you can share those comments or questions through the social channels. So say if you're watching this on Facebook, you would just put a question in the comments underneath. Same if you're watching it on YouTube. If you're with us on Twitter, then just use the hashtag #packagingEPR, and all of those will come through to our feed here, and we'll be able to put those questions to the panel. But before we delve into your questions, Jamie here is going to take us through a bit of the background to the proposed scheme in a bit more detail, just to set the scene. So Jamie, just handing over to you. I believe you've got some slides you're going to run through.
Yep, thank you very much, Andrew. Let me just share my screen here for you guys. Okay, apologies for this. My presentation isn't available in the window. So for the technical support, can you please add that to the list so I can add it on, please? Apologies for this, folks. As soon as we can get this on, I'm going to run you through a very broad overview of the packaging EPR consultation, running through the broad highlights to give you an idea of what the key components are, and hopefully start to stimulate some of your questions coming through in the Q&A, and also just allow a bit of time to get you thinking about which chapters you might want to concentrate on, or which consultation questions you want to concentrate on. Andrew, as we're having some technical issues, we might want to, shall we jump around a little bit to sort out the technical aspect?
Sorry, I was on mute there. So yeah, leaving you to radio silence on your own there. Yeah, we can't seem to get the presentation up, but that, not to worry. What to do is we're just going to cut to some questions just now, and if we can get that working in a bit, then we can put them up. But first up, Jamie, because this is quite a good introductory question anyway, it's kind of a scene-setting question. Can you tell us, like in a sort of succinct way, why a new EPR scheme is being introduced?
Yeah, no problem. So the current packaging EPR scheme is 20 years old. So it's achieved a lot. It's helped us meet the recycling targets that were in place. And it's fulfilled a function. But like anything that's 20 years old, there's a need to review and revise and make sure that those policies and those systems are fit for purpose. So we need to consider what the current and future challenges are. There's been a lot of discussion over, well, even over the last 10 years, looking at what amendments could be made to improve the packaging EPR scheme, things around transparency and granularity, but also how better drivers can be put in place in order to drive the change that we want to see in materials and products to align with a circular economy. It's also worth realising that extended producer responsibility as a concept has moved on quite a lot in that 20 years as well. So the new scheme intends to put in place some of the best practice principles that we're seeing both at EU level and in some of the more successful schemes in the EU. So things like full net cost recovery, the polluter pays, the producer pays the cost of waste management, reducing unnecessary packaging, so linking that into the essential requirements for packaging that's placed on the market, and different drivers to encourage reuse, drive quality, and encourage investment in the packaging sector as a whole, so that we can better align with the circular economy.
So how far along is it then? We're in the second stage consultation just now. So we're clearly somewhere down the process towards revising the scheme. Can you just give us a bit of an insight into like where the process is at and what at this stage of the consultation people are being asked to comment on?
Yeah, so in 2019 we had the first consultation going out, so it's a two-stage consultation, and in that first consultation there was a lot of open-ended questions. There was a lot of options presented to industry to get feedback and start to get a sense of what was possible and what was feasible. So that was 2 years ago now. The second stage consultation is live until the 4th of June, and within that things have moved along quite significantly. There are more in the way of the government preferred options or proposed mechanisms that people can start to get their teeth into and start to work their way around. But there are a couple of big items and notable in the chapters where government are looking for more feedback and a strong steer from industry, in particular around scheme governance, the role of a scheme administrator and any role of compliance schemes. That's one of the key ones that's still left relatively open-ended, subject to further discussion. And the other one is around business payments, payment for packaging waste from businesses. So that's the other area that's quite open-ended. There's 3 options in there, and there's no preferred mechanism. So following the close of the consultation, there will be an analysis of responses, and that's due to be published over the summer. Throughout this whole process, DAERA in particular are continuing to speak with different stakeholder groups to try and further some of the proposals that are in there, and then it will move into starting to draft the regulations. So implementation is proposed as being either 2023 or 2024, dependent on the consultation feedback. But then, as people will see from the consultation, there are a lot of different components to packaging EPR. So the idea is to put in place the initial scheme and start to build on that year on year. So if things are introduced 2023 or 2024, full implementation of all the measures would run through until 2027. And there's good reasons for that around allowing industry to time to adapt and making sure that you're building on a sound foundation. Ultimately leading up to 2030, which the consultation puts packaging recycling targets in place for.
Okay, so I mean, it's probably fairly easy for people to understand the producer pays principle, and it's like, okay, producers pay a more fair cost of dealing with the impacts of packaging at the end of its life. So, okay, there's money generated and it helps us to collect stuff, sort stuff, and get it recycled. But how would the new scheme actually incentivize packaging reduction or increased recyclability? What mechanisms does it have in order to do that?
Okay, so one of the fundamental principles of the new packaging EPR scheme is around full net cost recovery. So the current scheme, estimates vary, but I mean ultimately the current evidence notes and the purchase of those doesn't cover the full cost of managing packaging waste at end of life. So in the new scheme, the intention is to move that to 100% of the costs of managing packaging, regardless of whether that arises from households or businesses, for that to be met by producers. So there's a number of mechanisms that underpin that. And what that means is that producers wouldn't just be charged the cost of managing their waste at end of life. Instead, modulated fees would be introduced. And a modulated fee is effectively just a fee that's varied depending on what outcomes you want to achieve. So given that we want to achieve greater recyclability, we want more packaging to be collected and to be recycled at end of life, we want more reuse, we want less litter, you can vary the modulation criteria in order to reward or to penalise producers that are placing recyclable or non-recyclable packaging on the market. So that would mean that if you're putting something on the market which is readily recyclable, it's collected at curbside, there are known markets, there's a known reprocessing route for that, then you would face a comparatively lower fee than if you put something on the market which is non-recyclable.
Okay, that makes sense. And Emily, a question for you. I mean, this is obviously sounds like quite a significant change for us here in the UK, but do other countries operate EPR schemes like the one that we're proposing?
Thanks, Andrew. So yeah, packaging EPR is actually one of the most common forms of EPR around the world, with schemes covering packaging, batteries and waste electricals amongst other products. The majority of EU member states actually already have a scheme in place, and there are also schemes in other countries and regions around the world. Packaging EPR globally can take a wide variety of forms, but typically, as with the new scheme being introduced across the UK, it's the producers who are responsible for collecting, sorting, and either recycling or disposing of the packaging waste from households, commercial and industrial sources as well. And producers can fulfill these obligations either directly or by paying a third party to facilitate the obligations on their behalf.
Is that what we would say is a compliance scheme?
Yes, or in the case of the new scheme across the UK, a scheme administrator who kind of takes those obligations that individual producers have to make it more efficient and effective by doing it on their behalf. Okay,
cool. Now, I've just seen in the Jamie's message, we think we might be able to get the presentation up. Do you want to give that another bash, Jamie? Let's fingers crossed that it works this time.
Hopefully you can see that now.
Oh, wonderful. Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, good. We got there in the end. So if I can just confirm it's still showing now that I've put it full screen on my window as well, please, Andrew.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, better late than never then. Apologies, folks, but thank you very much for your patience while we try and work out the technical issues. I'm going to run through this very broad overview of the core components. Some of this has already been covered, so I will try not to repeat myself. But I do think it's important that we're able to run through a lot of the core components and proposals that are outlined in the packaging EPR consultation. So, blitzing through the initial definition, because most of you on this webinar are probably aware. But extended producer responsibility is that financial or physical responsibility on producers once their material, their packaging or their items reach end of life. Historically, that focus has been on making sure there's a responsible disposal route, but increasingly over the last couple of years, the focus has been on improving the design of materials to achieve better environmental outcomes, like less waste being generated, maximising lifespan of products, or encouraging better design. So things like recyclability or repairability, depending on what you're looking at. I referenced this in response to one of Andrew's questions, but this sets out the timeline for different EPR schemes in the UK and different measures which are coming in over the next couple of years. So packaging is the first of the 4 UK EPR schemes to be reviewed. I've gone through the timeline for packaging implementation, but it is worth noting that the review for the waste electricals and battery schemes are underway, and end-of-life vehicles is gearing up as well. It's fair to say when you look at this slide that the EPR is a busy policy area. There's a lot coming in, and there's some aligned policies such as the Environment Bill or the tax on plastic packaging, or the Single-Use Plastics Directive and the EPR requirements that would come in under that. So there's a lot going on at the moment. If you haven't heard a lot about EPR soon, you will be. But packaging is one of the more substantial reviews, and it's the first of the current UK ones. The packaging EPR consultation is a joint consultation by the 4 devolved administrations in the UK, the 4 administrations. It's led by DAERA, but the content of the consultation is in agreement with the 4 nations. And Zero Waste Scotland's role in this is to provide technical support to Scottish Government. So alongside SEPA, we help Scottish Government flesh out their policy position, understand the implications of it, and feed into their conversations as they take place with the other nations. I have largely covered this in response to Andrew's question, but just to allow people a chance to have a look at this infographic. It sets out the benefits of packaging EPR, and this aligns with the aims and objectives of the scheme. So to reduce unnecessary material, make more packaging recyclable, ramp up that quantity and quality of material that's available, stop the amount of leakage of valuable materials out of the circular economy through less litter, and incentivising reuse and refill as well. So, I mean, we've already started to get the sense that packaging EPR is a fairly complicated policy area. There's a lot of content in the consultation. So what I'm going to do is just run us through the core proposals, but outline and using this material flow diagram to help us along the way. So just to highlight some of the overarching components as we're looking at the system as a whole. So I referenced the governance arrangements that are being proposed, and there's two proposals which are in the consultation document, which set out roles for a scheme administrator with overall responsibility for making sure that packaging EPR achieves its aims and objectives, and also the role of compliance schemes, and whether that's a voluntary use or whether that's a regulated use, depending on the outcomes. It's also worth us just highlighting that a new packaging EPR scheme doesn't mean entirely new definitions. So the current definitions in legislation for packaging and packaging waste would stay, and all primary, secondary and tertiary packaging would be in scope of packaging EPR, unless it can be evidenced that it's being backhauled by the producers, or if it's in scope of the DRS schemes in Scotland or the rest of the UK. The material-specific recycling targets, which are already in place for paper, glass, wood, etc., would also remain in place, with a view to setting annual material targets, which then allow us to hit that 73% recycling rate, which is outlined in the consultation document. There are also proposals for a number of new targets to be explored, not on implementation in 2023 or 24, but in subsequent years. Particularly around reuse, closed loop targets, and also fibre-based composites as well, to try and address that material which would currently just go in under the paper material. And across this entire chain, there will be much greater emphasis on data, on collecting data at different points and on the granularity of it, to make sure that the scheme is fulfilling the purposes and the aims and objectives, but also to help understand material flows, to help understand whether we're meeting those quality and quantity objectives, but trying to strike a careful balance between making that granular enough to ensure the scheme is functioning as it should be, without overburdening the different actors in the supply chain. So if we jump to the first part in our supply chain, now that we've covered some of the overarching elements, and look at the manufacture and sale of packaging materials. So one of the big changes, which is outlined in the consultation, is moving away from that shared ownership or shared responsibility across the supply chain for any one piece of packaging that's placed on the market, to a single point of obligation. And that's important because the single point of obligation is proposed as being the brand owner wherever possible, and they would be the one that pay the fees for the waste management obligation. So they would be the ones paying the full net cost of the waste management systems. Now, this is quite a lengthy section of the consultation. There are a lot of there's a lot of subtleties in that, particularly when it comes to dealing with small and medium producers. So it is worth spending some time, because there are implications there for people like manufacturers and distributors potentially, in trying to find that balance between achieving the scheme outcomes but not overburdening some of the smaller businesses. There's also proposals for mandatory labelling requirements, so that anything that's placed on the market is labelled as either recyclable or non-recyclable. And that would be underpinned by a recyclability assessment. So the scheme administrator would be tasked with either procuring or developing a recyclability assessment that producers would have to use to determine whether their material is recyclable or not. And depending on what that classification was, that would influence which fees a producer pays. So as I said previously, it wouldn't be based on just the standard waste management cost at end of life. Those fees would likely be modulated in the first instance against recyclability, and that would determine what a producer has to pay. There's another significant element here in the nation of sale reporting, whereby those organisations selling packaging to the end consumer would have to report whether that's been placed on the market in England, Wales, Scotland or Northern Ireland. And that's partly, again, around understanding material flows, but it's also to ensure that the scheme administrator is hitting those recycling targets in all 4 nations as well. And we've covered the fibre-based composites and the closed-loop targets, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move around this circle. So jumping around to the consumer side, full net cost, as I've mentioned, is one of the big changes that are coming in. 100% full net cost recovery placed on producers for all packaging, effectively. So whether it's household-like, commercial and industrial, there would be a payment mechanism that covers that. That doesn't mean that the producer just has to pay the money out. It would be on the basis that waste management organisations and local authorities are running efficient and effective services. So the scheme administrator would be tasked with determining what efficient and effective means, and making sure that that's fair and equitable as well. There's a number of new collections and new take-back schemes announced in the consultation too. So films and flexible packaging, so a sizable amount of material that's films and flexible is placed on the market, and at the moment the infrastructure to collect that is poor or deficient. So this is about trying to address that, and that's going to be essential, particularly for trying to hit recycling targets around plastic as well. The mandatory labelling requirements would hopefully make this easier for the consumer to know what to do with that packaging at end of life, and there's a disposable cups take back requirement in there as well. So organisations selling filled disposable cups would be required to set up take back systems and to arrange for that material to be recycled. Coming around to the sorting and reprocessing, the modulated fees based on recyclability will hopefully mean that more packaging is recyclable, and we're getting a better quality of material when it comes to the collections. The fibre-based composites, the closed-loop targets, the films and flexibles and disposable cups will all require investment in infrastructure it will all require more in the way of reporting and monitoring in order to ensure that the targets are being met for those outcomes. All of that is obviously underpinned by data without overburdening the system, and there are changes to export requirements outlined in the consultation as well, which my colleague Nat is far better placed to talk about. I think the general gist of the export requirements is that, one, there will be a consultation further in the year around some of the specifics on export legislation and categorisation, but with a much greater emphasis on transparency and understanding of material flows and end destinations. So last slide, just to outline all the different measures that constitute packaging EPR. And obviously, a lot of these are proposals at the moment. They're not necessarily definite. That's subject to the consultation. But as I said previously, implementation in 2023 or 24, subject to the responses, and getting a working, functioning system in place upon which we can build in things like full net cost in future years, or modulated fees, with slightly longer lead-ins for labelling requirements, films and flexibles collections, and take back on disposable cups as well, all ultimately leading us into that 2030 year of trying to hit those targets. So apologies for the technical hiccup earlier on. That is a very quick run through a very long consultation, I'm sure you'll appreciate, but hopefully that's generated some questions or focused your attention in on certain areas of the consultation. So please pop those questions in the question in the chat, and over to you, Andrew.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for that, Jamie. That was a really good overview. We are seeing some questions starting to come in, so I'm just going to take a few of those now. But Nat, there's one that I want to direct to you first. How will the new scheme change the way that packaging is actually handled in the supply chain, and what would the impacts be on the different, actors involved there?
Yeah, so I think most of the stuff has been covered by Jamie, but the way I would like to look at it is maybe on two ends. First of all, on the actors that are involved in placing packaging on the market. That's the front end side of it. And then the second area is to look at the waste side of it. So if you're looking at the actors involved in placing packaging on the market, I'll use a plastic bottle as an example. That in the current packaging system that we still have at the moment, there usually are 5 players who are involved in the fulfilling the obligation to recycle the bottle. So it'll be the one who manufactured the actual plastic pellets, like the likes of Ineos, I suppose, in Grangemouth, the one who took those pellets and converted the pellets into a bottle, and then the one who is, in this case, Vimto, who actually filled this bottle with their product and passed it on to a seller like Tesco's, who would also take on an obligation. So all these actors, they currently have an obligation, 6%, 9%, 37% and 48% of the 100% to recycle each and every item of packaging. But things are changing now, as Jamie said, that later on in the new system proposed, it will be focusing on a single point of contact, or a single point of compliance, i.e., in most cases, it's the brand owners that will have to be responsible for that. Then the other issue also is that in the current system, we rely a lot on just recycling packaging at the very end, and without actually considering that it also has an impact on other players within the chain, like local authorities who spend a lot of money and resource to collect that packaging. So the obligations will also have to make sure that the funding shifts away from the recyclers and starts funding the local authorities, because that's where the collections and the quality of the material that's been collected, when you sort it, is focused on. The other issue also, I think, for the producers is that it will incentivize the people who are placing packaging on the market to start thinking about designing it for the environment, because it's beating them in the pockets. So they will have to think about how to minimize that, whilst also taking into account when the product they are placing on the market is adding, recycled content in it. And then at the other end, as I say, we are moving away from recyclers issuing packaging recovery notes and getting a revenue from that. and saying that the money has to go to where the activity is taking place of collecting and sorting. Because by the time the recycler receives it, the value of the product is what dictates whether they were interested in buying it or not. And as Jamie indicated, it's the issue here is quality is at the heart of the whole system, not just quantity, but make sure that the quality is increased. So we are likely to see that, better quality going into the recycling processes, and also maybe a little bit more investment in the UK rather than relying on people exporting stuff, outside the UK, as it is, the case most of the times. So, I mean, we could have a discussion the whole day, but there's so many other things that are involved in there. But the changes, as have been highlighted earlier on, is that the players we have in the system, it's slightly narrowing it down, mostly focusing on local authorities and a single point of contact.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, just because you used the example of a plastic bottle there, a drinks bottle, so it's just leading me to drawing one of the questions that we've had from the live chat from Lizzie, who says, how does this EPR consultation link with the forthcoming deposit return scheme? And also she references consistent collections there, which is obviously another consultation that DAERA have launched on, consistency of recycling collections across the UK. But Jamie, do you want to just give us a bit of a steer on like how this consultation fits in with the sort of wider plans on DRS and consistent collections?
Yeah, sure. It's a really good question, and obviously there is a real importance to make sure that different policies that impact on similar areas are going to be joined up. So it's helpful that the three consultations, certainly for UK-wide packaging EPR and then English consistency collections and rest of the UK DRS are lined up. So the Scottish Government and actually NAT as well as Zero Waste Scotland, we're very mindful of the fact that Scottish DRS is going to come in slightly ahead of the packaging EPR scheme. So there are conversations underway to make sure that material isn't double counted and that doesn't have adverse impacts on the packaging EPR scheme. I mean, essentially, they're all facets of the same wider system. So deposit return has its own specific containers which are in scope, and they're subject to the deposit return mechanisms. Packaging EPR covers all the things which are out with that scope, but both are aiming to increase the quality and quantity of the stuff that's collected. And it's trying to increase the amount which is actually recycled. It's trying to increase those secondary markets. So they both have the same broad, wider environmental benefits. And that extends to things like reduction in litter as well. The consistent collections is a really interesting one because ultimately, without the collection mechanism, the packaging EPR side of things, you can incentivize the recyclability as much as you like, but if there's not a consistent and effective collection system in place, we're not going to be able to gather that material. So in Scotland, we have the Household Recycling Charter Code of Practice, which is under review at the moment. So that's looking at which materials are accepted in local authorities. The English Consistency of Collections proposal is out. We've got the Welsh Blueprint, for example. So there are either mandatory or voluntary collection standards which are sort of paving the way for this, which starts to complete that circle. So I think my shorter answer would probably be that they are all facets of the same thing. They're all fundamentally dealing with packaging items to try and achieve those broader outcomes to make sure that things are more recyclable, that they are collected, they do end up being recycled, and they're available as recycled content for further products.
Okay, that leads into something. It's literally just come into the chat there, but someone's saying, so brand owners incentivized to make a recyclable product, and for example, DRS maybe recovers that, but then how will it be prevented from being exported and dumped or burned? I mean, we've seen this stuff in the press in the last few days. It's clearly on people's minds, and I think Nat touched on it a bit. But perhaps it's worth Nat you expanding on that a little bit. Like, what will encourage the actual material we collect to be genuinely recycled and not fall foul of some of these practices we've been seeing in the press? My understanding is it's really just about improving the quality, and some of those instances are where the quality is not such that the end product has that sale value. because of contamination or other issues. But I don't know if you can expand on that.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things in there, and it's worth looking at it in a sort of a holistic way. So you've heard Jamie talk about all the other initiatives that are coming in. People will have targets to meet if they're recycling. You know, if you are a recycler, you probably have controls to make sure that you're recycling materials above a certain efficiency. You know, so if you're taking in plastic bottles, I think the processes will have to go towards the idea of making sure that you know, they are up the recycling chain rather than downcycling. And as we already indicated, that if quality improves at the collection, it automatically dictates what happens to that, you know, a material when it reaches the reprocessing site, because it's already good material. So people are likely to fight for that. The plastics tax that has already come in, it's coming in around the corner, will be requiring producers, companies that are producing packaging, to pay a higher tax depending on the level of and amount of recycled plastics or recycled content into the new product. So obviously, most of these will be looking for this material, and the markets will dictate that that material doesn't go for export, but it stays within the country. Now, you've heard in the news in the last couple of days, Turkey has already announced that it does not want to take any plastics, you know, from imported into their country. And it was one of the remaining countries where most of the waste plastics were going, because China tightened their borders as well for that. So the original destinations for exports are narrowing down, less and less, and a lot of companies are competing for, you know, moving stuff there. And in this case, if we get our act right here, you find that you start driving automatically desire for local people to actually invest in dealing with materials, because the buyers and the end use markets will be locally available, because the policy is actually encouraging everybody in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the arguments I remember seeing around, you know, the deposit return scheme's introduction, is that it creates so much of a greater kind of high quality stream of well sorted plastic that, again, that lends itself to domestic reprocessing potential then, and incentivizing that, because you've got that great stream of material. We're going to just cover another few quick questions before we move on to the next segment. Dave Edwards on the chat has posted a couple of questions. We'll try and kind of get through a couple of these, but one of them is saying, well, are there any incentives here to move away from bottled water? And Emily, I don't know if you could just pick that up, because there is a thing here in the ethos of this new scheme that it may encourage, for example, reuse. So I don't know if that ties into the question Dave's asking there.
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. As Jamie said in his presentation, one of the aims and objectives of the scheme is to increase reuse and refill. While the consultation does focus on targets for recycling, it is actually proposed that reuse and refill targets could be introduced from 2025 onwards. And the consultation does ask kind of views for this. So absolutely, yeah, we are trying to move towards those options, as well as looking at recycling.
Great stuff. Okay, now we've still got quite a few more questions to get through, which is great. Do keep them coming, and we'll try and get through them all. In the meantime, though, one of the things we did prior to the webinar, just in order to kind of bring in some different voices and opinions beyond the ones of Zero Waste Scotland and SEPA, is that we spoke to quite a few stakeholders who are either going to be affected by EPR or are already working in that sphere and have a point of view on it to share. So we have a kind of short clip here just capturing some of the thoughts from stakeholders on this issue that we're just going to take a look at just now.
I'm the Managing Director of EXPRA, which is the Extended Producer Responsibility Alliance, which is a platform of 27 EPR systems for packaging from all over the world. I think packaging is only reflecting the challenge, the problem that we have with our business model of economy in general. Up to now, our business model was very linear, that we produce something, we sell it to the consumer is using the product, the packaging, and then it is disposed. But this, we understood, we are not able to continue this way of living, this way of making businesses. So the idea is to go to a circular economy where even the used product is staying in the circle. And that's what we try to do with packaging as well. And EPR is a tool to help to keep packaging or other products within our business circle. If we want to make packaging circular, we have to include those who are producing the packaging as well, because only if they understand that their design choices have a consequence for the waste management, then they can change it, adapt it, and make it easier to reuse or to recycle their packaging. In all the countries with a well-functioning EPR system, you can see that the amount of packaging that is recycled has increased drastically. And the good thing, the positive thing is with an EPR system that you have enough funding to do so. Even enough funding if the times are very difficult. The biggest benefit of having a well-functioning EPR system is that you can include the intelligence, the experience, the know-how, but also the financial contributions from those who are putting packaging onto the market into your waste management circle for packaging. So it is not only a matter for inhabitants, for the waste management sector, for local authorities. You include the full circle of stakeholders which are dealing with packaging. And this helps you to improve the design so they can be easier collected, sorted and recycled. And it ensures that even in financial difficult times, you can increase the funding to keep the circle going and turning.
Yeah, I'm Trevor Gregory. I'm the founding CEO of Tradewrite International. Tradewrite International is a social enterprise, and we most of our products actually begin over in Ghana, where we have 5 cooperatives of women who collect and process shea nuts into shea butter. Some of that is then brought over to Greenock, where we're based, where we're making natural skincare with the shea butter. We also contract manufacture for about 20-25 small niche startup brands, and we help formulate their products, advise them on types of packaging that are out there, and make their products on their behalf. We also have our own brand, Carachet, which is sold throughout the UK. Overall, I think the EPR scheme and the ideas that are out there are good and positive. The thing that we're concerned about is what is the impact on small businesses. You see, we're dealing with, as I say, first-hand, face-to-face, we're dealing with 25 small brands. Most of them are just one employee. We're also in contact through Facebook groups that we've helped establish in the past with over 1,000 small businesses who are in the natural skincare realm, and they are just 1 or 2 employees. Some of them aren't even making enough to pay themselves, but they're wanting to do something and get products out. We've also noticed that the small business is really very creative and is very conscious as well of the impact of packaging by way of waste, plastic, etc. And they're wanting to produce products that are sustainable and use packaging that is sustainable as well. So you've in a way, we're talking to, if you like, a converted audience. They don't need persuading. What they need to know is what's being proposed going to be too onerous on me as a small business? Where does it sit with me? And what are my options open within it? How can I improve and be part of it?
My name's Lewis McLean, and I'm the Managing Director at McLeans Bakery in Forres in the north of Scotland. To give you a little bit of background into McLeans Bakery, we are a family business, and at this moment in time, I work with my brother, my sister, and even my son and my daughter, and quite a few in-laws too. So, and we have a BRC registered bakery business in Forres, and we're lucky enough to have our own shops, but we also supply longer life products both nationally and internationally. Ways that we have reduced our packaging impact is our Christmas range. For this year, we've reduced plastic. I'd like to say almost completely, but out of a range of 9 products, we've got one that has a plastic tray that we couldn't source anywhere. So I've got this here. This is for our Christmas pies. We've got a cardboard tray, and we're doing it to help the environment, but also more importantly, probably is customers are looking for that. I'm really proud of my products, and I'll equally want to be proud of my packaging as well, and the impact that it has, for everyone. When I first heard about EPR, I thought it was really good because I feel we've got to be responsible as a manufacturer for all our packaging, and I think the EPR is quite an extensive consultation, so I do feel people should be aware of what's happening and if they have strong opinions, put them in.
Hi, my name's Steve Gofillon. I'm a Waste Strategy Officer at West Lothian Council, where I've worked for over 12 years now. I'm also LARAC Scotland representative. LARAC was formed in 1985 and it represents the emerging voice of local government recycling officers. The section of the EPR consultation for packaging that are paramount for local authorities are captured by one of the overarching principles of the EPR document itself, and I'll quote here because I think it's quite important. Costs paid by producers will support a cost-effective and efficient system for managing packaging waste, including the collection of a common set of packaging materials for recycling from households and businesses. The phrase cost-effective and efficient is used quite extensively throughout the consultation, and LARAC members have raised concerns about the definition of cost-effective and efficient, and who determines what is cost-effective and efficient. There's real concern that the very rural nature of some authorities in Scotland means they are unlikely to fit into one of the 9 family groups, and so will have a benchmark cost that's unachievable, and so ultimately they may not receive their full net costs. It's also unclear how local authorities in Scotland will be assessed when they're not subject to the consistent collection policy that English local authorities will be placed under. The consultation, or EPR for packaging, represents a fundamental shift in the way local authority recycling and waste services are going to be operating over the next 10 to 20 years. Scotland's got a slightly different dynamic because we've already got DRS and recycling charter, so EPR is going to have to try and fit into what Scotland's already established or is trying to establish. The EPR document is quite a lengthy document at 213 pages, but if you were to focus on certain sections, I would say that Section 5, producer obligations for full net cost payments, Section 8, payments for managing packaging waste, Section 10, scheme administration and governance, and Section 12, compliance and enforcement.
All right. So yeah, really good to just get, I guess, some outside opinions there from various different stakeholders and business owners and things like that. And we have actually got some business owners on the chat here asking questions specific to how this is going to affect them. So I'm going to try and come to some of those questions. So Richard Green works for Dundee and Angus Wood Recycling, which is a community interest company. They use pallets and wood waste and then convert those into different things. What are the new rules around pallets? Because they are a form of packaging, and what income should we be charging to collect them from businesses? So I don't know how specifically we can answer that, but Jamie, what are the steps? Would pallets be classed as packaging and covered under this?
So yeah, so pallets are classed as packaging. So there are various definitions of different types of producers. So without diving into too much of the detail, instead I would probably echo Steve Gilfillan and suggest having a look at that chapter in the consultation. But it depends on how they're making it to market and whether something is owned by someone at the end of it or whether it's being leased, and that determines what the full net cost payments are. And I think it was Richard that also mentioned something about getting out there and speaking to businesses and understanding the recycling opportunities. And I mean, I have to say, I love that enthusiasm. And the scheme administrator will be looking for efficient and effective systems. They'll be looking for the right end markets for different packaging materials as well. So perhaps things like exploring partnerships with social enterprises is an interesting kind. That's something that's of real interest for putting in to the consultation response.
Hear you.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Nat, so do you want to add to that? Because I know that's kind of quite in your wheelhouse as well.
Yeah, I think the pallets one is quite an interesting, and the only issue I wanted to add onto that is to recognize that the system will recognize if somebody is bringing in the pallet for the first time onto the UK market, then they will have an obligation against that pallet. But it also recognizes anybody who is reusing pallets that are already on the market, that they don't have to be penalized and pay for the packaging system. So it's only once at the time when the pallet is introduced on the market, whilst recognizing that it's got the potential to be reused and reused again within the chain. So it will be taken care of along those lines.
Okay, then I hope that's reassuring for Richard, because that does sound like a fabulous business you've got going there. So thanks for getting in touch. A comment there from Catherine Gemmell, who we know because she works for the Marine Conservation Society and was a guest on our previous webinar on Single-Use Plastics Directive, but just commenting there that a successful EPR scheme should have an amazing impact on the amount of litter found on our beaches, and she said it's fantastic to hear the enthusiasm for it. So thanks for getting in touch, Catherine. That is good to hear that you're in support as well. We have a question here on from Zoe Weir. Says, is it technically possible to manufacture a new plastic bottle more cheaply than a virgin one? I wonder if she means from recycled materials. And can a new plastic bottle be made from 100% recycled, or does it always need to contain some virgin material? So I suppose this is linked to the chat we were having about increasing recycled content in our product, but how high can that recycled content go? Can it go all the way up to 100? Jamie?
Well, we know that there are drinks manufacturers, for example, that have bottles out where they're stating it's 100% recycled. I think there's probably two things that would be interesting to dive into further there, but probably subject to their own webinars. One is whether that is at scale. How do you get a fully closed loop recycled packaging into things like drinks containers? And DRS is obviously something which is going to help that because it's large quantities of material and high quality. But moving away from the bottle side of things, we know that there are issues around food contact to food contact applications, and certainly technology has a part to play in that. So yeah, we know that there are people who are saying that that is already technically possible. I guess the other bit is an economics aspect, which is the virgin price of oil, the price of virgin plastic linked to the price of oil. So we know that things like the plastic packaging tax, and we're seeing that in the EU as well, are trying to level that playing field between virgin and recycled material.
Okay. We have a question that you're just talking about oil price there, so I'm just going to pivot to a question relating to oil, but in a slightly different way. How does this affect contaminated packaging? Kenny Wilson on YouTube is saying we use a large volume of gear oil generating waste packaging. So he's talking about steel drums. Apparently that's classed as hazardous waste and currently costs us to dispose of. Nat, could you just talk us through the implications to someone who's in that position?
Yeah, so we need to remember that at the bottom of all this, whilst we're encouraging recycling and all the other activities, we should also recognize that there are other materials that are potentially, hazardous, and we need to protect human health, those people involved in the recycling chain and the like. So the system is set up in such a way that, where such containers, for example, as in what you've been given here, has been in contact with material that is seen as a special waste or hazardous waste, it has to be dealt with in a specific, special way. And normally that has got a cost attached to it. But it's still removing the idea of making sure that the packaging that we've got that needs to be recycled is collected separately and does not mix with such hazardous stuff to maximize on the quality and the amount that can be recycled properly. So yeah, it's important to remember that at the back of all this, protecting the environment, protecting the health of the people, and dealing with hazardous material still has to go on with all the other regimes that control the special wastes over and above what EPR, DRS, and all these new policies are bringing in.
Okay, thanks, Nat. Hopefully that answers Kenny's question. Emily, there's a question come through. It's about mandatory labelling. Can you tell us a little bit more about mandatory labelling of packaging, and does that apply to producers overseas who are exporting into the UK? And how do we imagine that will affect small businesses here?
Yeah, Andrew. So the aim of labelling is to ultimately increase the consumer's knowledge of the packaging which can and cannot be recycled, and to ensure there's a kind of a consistent message to consumers on all packaging, so that it's intended that packaging will be labelled as recycle or do not recycle, with this being implemented from 2024-25. There will, however, need to be some interim solutions for some materials such as plastic films and flexibles whilst the collection and recycling infrastructure is put in place. In order to be able to determine what labelling should be used, packaging will need to be assessed against the recyclability assessment, and that will be the same one that's used for modulated fees. On to small businesses. While all packaging will need to be labelled, in the case of small businesses who may, for example, be using off-the-shelf packaging, the preferred option is for the obligation to label the packaging to fall to either the wholesaler or the manufacturer of the unfilled packaging itself, who will label that packaging on behalf of the small businesses. All packaging that's placed on the UK market will need to be labelled, and in the case of packaging that's imported, it will be down to the importer to place the label onto the packaging.
Okay, so some of that takes the onus off small businesses then, perhaps a little, because packaging that they buy in will be pre-labelled.
Absolutely. So it's to ensure that it's still consistent, but take the burden away from small businesses.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to move on to another question here. Jamie, what about compostable and biodegradable packaging? Is that within scope for this?
Yeah, so it is. So compostable and biodegradable are included. It is worth having a look through the consultation section again. So for those producers placing compostable and biodegradable packaging on the market, there will be producer fees associated with that. However, it's worth noting that the consultation proposes that both those packaging types will be classed as non-recyclable on implementation. And it gives a number of reasons for that, but I mean, essentially down to issues around confusion that result in contamination, as well as the ensuring that the right collection and reprocessing infrastructure is in place for them as well. So, I mean, the consultation does also recognise that there are potential benefits to using compostable or biodegradable packaging. Particularly things like closed events where you're able to guarantee the collection of it and then arrange for that specific disposal. But that's pretty much where the limitations are, and how that would be administered remains to be seen as well. But compostables and biodegradables are, again, moving to the principle behind it. The idea is that if the industry want to be able to have a certain type of packaging classed as recyclable, then they would have to work with the scheme administrator to agree a pathway for that. The consultation has films and flexibles, which is essentially on that pathway just now around collection infrastructure, secondary markets, etc. So there are routes for things that are non-recyclable potentially to become recyclable in certain circumstances, but that would be a process that would have to be worked through with the scheme administrator once in place.
Do you see any difficulty with producers demonstrating the recyclability of compostables? Because, I mean, as I understand it, they quite often don't end up being composted because they would need to go to an industrial composter in order for that to happen. So is there any likelihood that you might struggle to argue its definition of its clear path to recyclability, given that a lot of the time that stuff is just put into general waste?
So, I mean, again, I think it's probably another webinar in and of itself. But we know that there's potentially a role in terms of standards and accreditation. We know that, for example, some local authorities accept some compostable materials in with their organic waste. So again, it would really be down to being able to demonstrate the benefits of that packaging, being able to demonstrate how you align with the wider aims and objectives that the scheme administrator sets out, and then setting out a pathway to it, which would require investment from the producers as well in making sure that that infrastructure is in place.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we've got time for just a few more questions. One I was going to ask to Nat. Nat, will the introduction of packaging EPR result in the UK government ceasing the practice of allowing the PRO monies being used to support the export of post-consumer recycled materials in order to meet recycling targets?
Thanks for that, Andrew. I think it's important to just go back into the current system that we've got. That the origins of it are from the packaging directive at the European level. And it did set targets and systems whereby recyclers and exporters were issuing packaging recovery notes. I think the PRO is probably referring to PRNs, packaging recovery or recycling notes, which you issue to as evidence to show that you have dealt with X percentage or X tons of plastics or cans and things like that. And then the producers buy that evidence of the recycler and demonstrate it to the regulators like SEPA to say, I have met my obligation. So within that system, it's also recognized that export is part and parcel of that system. So exporters, if they want to export any packaging waste to any overseas country, they have to apply for accreditation from the regulators, SEPA, Environment Agency, and the like. And as part of that accreditation system, we will check with the destination authorities whether the site that the exporter has applied for is bona fide and it is operating at similar standards as the sites in the UK. So it's allowed within the system and it's recognized. And if people don't follow that, then they are removed out of the accreditation system. Now, having said that, one other weakness in the current system has been that there are some recyclers who will be outside the packaging system. They don't issue any evidence, but they are still dealing with packaging, which may end up going in places that we really didn't want. And we're trying to tighten, as Jamie indicated earlier on, in the proposals at the moment, the bits about exporters will be tightened. Secondly, the money or the revenue that is made by the recyclers and the level or the cost per ton of the PRNs, it's not something that us as regulators control. That's left out to the markets to dictate. We are interested in just the evidence to say, I have recycled plastics and the plastics we're packaging. That's it. So the current model really works on the assumption that those who have bought the material, that means the revenue from that material will be passed back up the chain. Whether that money reaches the people who were collecting the material, like local authorities and the like, is another question. And that's one of the things that the new system is designed to address. So it's moving away from relying on the recyclers and exporters to rely on the people who are sorting the packaging and the quality of the material output from their sorting facilities, so that by the time it reaches recyclers, it's good quality, fit for whatever purpose it's been sent for. So there's a bit of a shift, but it's the key thing is to recognize that we're done properly. recycling is a business and we can't say we don't want it. We can just create enough incentives in the UK to deal with our own materials if we can, and attract more investment into the UK.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nat. There's just a couple of final questions that I'm just going to throw over to the panel. One was to say, it all sounds very positive. How would you see this working in large organizations like health boards? Jamie, how would this affect something like a health board? I mean, presumably, would they then, they're paying for their waste collection at the moment, but presumably under this, there's maybe some support for organizations that covers some of the costs of that. Would that be right?
Yeah, so it's a big, complicated organisation, probably one of the more complicated organisations that we could be asked specifically about. But yeah, I think there are a number of areas within the consultation that would impact them. It's a difficult one to answer succinctly because the NHS and health boards have their own packaging waste that they're dealing with. That's a very mixed stream in terms of just the standard packaging we think of around food, as well as all the pharmaceutical side of things. So there's different aspects you have to take into account for that. But the NHS also hosts quite a lot of businesses within their properties as well, some of which will be brand owners. So I'm afraid I can't succinctly and neatly summarise how that would work, but I would say that I think NHS boards, for example, may end up constituting, they may end up having some obligations under, for example, cups takebacks. They may well have a nation of sale reporting requirements. They are undoubtedly going to be impacted by business waste payments as well. And that's before we get into the different types of packaging that the NHS tends to use. Okay, yeah. So not an easy answer to that, but hopefully that was in some way useful to the person that asked the question, Joe Anderson. And just last one, I mean, this will maybe is a fairly straightforward one to answer, but Louise on YouTube says, for something like a bubble wrap envelope, who pays for the item to be recycled? Because obviously it's two materials, it's plastic and then paper, but who has the responsibility, the manufacturer or the person posting the item? I assume the answer is the manufacturer. Emily, is that right?
The obligated party is the person placing it on the market. So it would be whoever the brand owner is of that packaging. Yeah, so perhaps whoever's selling like jiffy bags into the post office or whatever for you to buy. Yeah, it's whoever places it on the market, but it's not consumer to consumer. So if you were, sending something through eBay, that doesn't count, but it would be the brand owner who's placing it on the market.
And do you think that packaging EPR is likely to reduce the amount of items that are on the market that are mixed materially in that way?
Well, certainly the modulated fees will apply here because, yes, they are looking to make packaging more recyclable. So something like a mixed component item would have a higher fee. So the incentive is on the producer to make that easier to recycle, and how they do that is up to them. But yeah, possibly not mixing different material types that are difficult to split out from one another.
Yeah. Okay. We'll perhaps just take one or two more. Some of those we had emailed in prior. Jamie, who will be the scheme administrators in all this?
Yeah, good question, and particularly because because one of the open elements to this is around the scheme administrator and governance. So, I mean, the simple answer is it's to be determined who's going to be the scheme administrator. It would be a procurement process. It would be an open process, likely led by the UK government, but requiring sign-off from the devolved administrations as well. So the consultation outlines that it's intended to be an industry-run, not-for-profit that can demonstrate support from across the supply chain, and that follows good practice elsewhere. But yeah, in short, government will issue a tender and organisations will be able to apply either individually or as a consortium. And like any bidding process, they will need to meet certain criteria and demonstrate that they can do that before the successful party enters into a contract with government that sets out how they're going to operate and the contractual terms.
Okay, and one of the very final ones we had emailed in advance was just asking about the scheme administrator is expected to develop or procure the assessment methodology on behalf of its members. Will the chosen methodology be common throughout the UK, and who would be responsible for providing it? I don't know if either Jamie or Nat can pick that one up.
Yeah, happy to chip in, and Jamie, you can add any extra stuff on it. Yeah, so in terms of developing the methodology, as you can imagine, there's a myriad of, products, different types of products in the country. And one person can't be an expert to, dictate how that is produced in the end. So a scheme administrator is likely, and I think there is going to be a requirement proposed in the current draft, in the current consultation, that the scheme administrator should set up a group to work with industry, so that at least there is a level of consistency and buy-in and agreement from all the different players, not just the manufacturers, but probably also the people who are dealing with the waste as well, throughout the chain, the value chain of that product, to come up with an agreed way of assessing the product, so that it's consistent throughout the UK, not just us in Scotland operating slightly different to everybody else. That's the idea, really. And it's hoped that if we do it that way, then you get a wider buy-in and less arguments about which product lies in which category, sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Great. We've got some very quick final ones. I'm just going to rattle through the quick answers to these now, if you can. Emily, will the labelling provide advice on how to present the materials? For example, it needs to be clean, dry, empty, wash and squash. Do you think they will go that far, or are we just looking at binary recycle or non-recycle?
So the consultation doesn't propose that at present. It is just binary labeling, but this could form part of the communications campaign going forward. But it would ultimately be a decision for the scheme administrator to make in their efforts to improve the quantity and quality of the recycling.
Okay, thanks for that. Jamie, as producers will pass on all EPR costs, some or all EPR costs onto consumers, could cost indication of packaging and recycling/disposal be included on packaging as part of a national UK-wide education campaign? This would help explain the reasons for cost increases, and consumers may start to understand the value and cost of materials. Do you think that's likely?
So I can't comment on likely. What I can say is that visible fees under other EPR schemes that separate out the cost of the product from the additional costs incurred by EPR are used in other schemes. They're used for other products. I agree that it certainly would help raise the consumer awareness. I think there are some difficulties in there in how you standardise that, given that unless you're very clear about how you separate out those costs, the implications for different products mean different things in terms of the cost margins. It's not in scope at the moment, but that's not to say that something like the Environment Bill, with some of the information provision clauses that are in there, may not bring something like that about in future.
Cool. Okay, so it's a maybe. And then finally, I think this is the last question. Nat, could a digitized system be used for the data collection and reporting requirements, such as e-waste tracking, instead of a manual system like waste data flow?
The simple answer is yes. And at the moment, DAERA, the UK government, in conjunction with the devolved administrations, we are developing a new system, a digital system that is going to look after all the data. As we've indicated, there's a huge amount of information in here, but all the data from products being placed on the market to dictate on the modulation of the fee, all the way down to collection and management of the products when they become waste, and the sorting, the sampling of that, the sorting facilities, all the way down to recycling. So DAERA is designing that. After this meeting, in the next 15 minutes, I should be joining the data discussions with DAERA on the digital side of it. Yes.
Okay, great. So Nat is straight on that. So that's great. Okay, well, that, as far as I can see, and there are questions coming in from a variety of sources, but as far as I'm best aware, that's us answered them all. So I'm going to wrap up there because we were due to finish at past, but I thought, well, if people are asking questions, then we should try and make a bit of extra time to answer them. But if you asked a question that we didn't get to, we will try and respond to that in the chat later. You can email us at epr@zerowastescotland.org.uk if you didn't have a chance to ask a question, or it came to you after the stream finished. You can also engage with the consultation itself up until midnight on Friday, the 4th of June. So as we've sort of made reference to, it's quite a big consultation. It's about 200 and odd pages. So if you really want to dive into the detail, perhaps don't leave it until the 4th of June. But yeah, it's there now. You can access that. We have set up a kind of a simple URL. If you want to write it down, it's zws.scot/packaging-EPR, and that will take you straight to it. Or you can just visit the DAERA consultation hub directly through Google. Meantime, if you have any further questions, you can send those to us. For now, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Jamie and Emily and Nat. Thank you very much for being on the panel. Thank you to everybody that sent in the filmed sections that contributed to the wee video. Thank you very much to everybody that tuned in and asked questions as well, with loads of questions. So really good engagement on this topic. I think it's been just helpful just to discuss some of this stuff and be able to kind of address people's queries. So yeah, from myself and everyone at Zero Waste Scotland, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.